It's saying Azure for extension is not enabled on this. Do you want to enable? Of course, I want to use .NET 4, so that should be fine. Let's go ahead and save it. If you come in here, you see these files appear over here. This is my STS ready to go. Now, I'm going to target this web application. This web application, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that it starts to use this STS. So how do I do that? I'm going to say right click, add STS reference, and I first need the application URI. In other words, what is the URL that this application is going to run on? So in order to get that, I'll simply go ahead and run the application. It says localhost 18028, right? That's the application URI. So let me go ahead and copy this. Now, if you were doing this for SharePoint, the application URI obviously would be different, and the steps would be slightly different too. But let's address that in a minute. Let's make sure that our STS is working. So I'm going to go ahead and type in application URI here, hit next, and it says the application is not HTTPS. Do you want to continue? Generally speaking, you know, HTTPS everything. Honestly, that is the guidance going forward. HTTPS everything. There's very little downside in HTTPSing stuff, and especially when you're working with claims, etc. Even though the fed auth cookie and the tokens themselves are encrypted, there is really no downside to HTTPSing the entire tunnel. So generally, you should HTTPS it, but it's just development environment. So I'm just going to hit yes here. I'm going to say use an existing STS. And here I need to point it to the federation metadata.xml file, which lives inside of here. You can also download this directly using the HTTP URL. If you were to actually examine this web.config, you will see that you can simply download it. Its authorization is set to all users, but I'm just going to go ahead and browse it off of the disk. This is a perfectly valid way of doing it, and I'm going to hit next. Now I'm going to go ahead and enable encryption for the tokens, and the reason is because the tokens that the STS is issuing are encrypted. So think of it this way, that this STS has a certificate. Now when I generated this project, it generated a certificate for me, and it registered that at the appropriate locations inside of Windows. So the tokens are going to be encrypted. So in order to be able to decrypt them, I have to use encryption. So I'm going to choose an existing certificate from store, select cert, and this is the cert that was generated for me. Now, if you want to use a different cert, now this cert doesn't need to be issued by a VeriSign or one of these internet authorities, but it does need to be a valid cert with a public-private key pair, because the public-private key is available over here, so the STS can encrypt, but the relying party needs to be able to decrypt. So whatever I'm doing here for ASP.NET, by selecting this, I've basically made the public part of the cert available to the ASP.NET application. You will have to do an equivalent of this step for SharePoint as well, right? So all of these steps that you do for ASP.NET, there are equivalent steps that you need to do for SharePoint. But how you do those steps is slightly different. You do them with PowerShell scripts, and we'll see those very, very shortly as well. I'm going to hit next. These are the claims that are being issued by the STS here. I'm going to choose to consume both. I'm going to hit next. And this is typically you would do this for internet facing sites, for production sites, but I'm just going to ignore that, and I'm going to hit finish and hit OK. Now I'm going to go ahead and run this, and let's see what happens. So it's giving me this assertion because it is redirecting to the STS. The STS, we're just using a simple development certificate here. So it's not a valid cert. So Internet Explorer is saying that this is not a valid cert. Well, we know that in a real world environment, this certificate here would be trusted by a VeriSign or your internal trust store. But I'm just going to go ahead and hit continue to this website. It's just a development environment. I'm going to say continue to this website, and what I'm hoping to see, here you go. This page is being rendered by the STS. And that's very interesting, because if you were to examine what has been sent to the STS in the URL, you'll see a number of interesting things. I'm not going to go through all of these, but in general, it sends things like the realm, that is who the relying party is, the time, and a bunch of other things that guarantee the security of this. So even a replay cannot, recreate the cert. The logic of this STS is that any username that you enter in here is considered a valid user. That's basically it. You can make this logic more interesting. The STS is just an ASP.NET app. Theoretically, you could put in, I don't know, face recognition over here if you wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and hit submit, and I get an error. The reason I'm getting this error is because there has been a new check that has been added in ASP.NET 4.0 to prevent cross-site scripting attacks. So you can disable the form digest checking over here, or you can add a custom request validator. I'm going to go ahead and add a custom request validator into my project. Now, to add a custom request validator, I went into my ASP.NET application. I went ahead and added a class in here, right? In this class, I'm going to go ahead and write some interesting code. This code, put simply, basically says every request is okay, right? You can make this more fancy if you want. Like, you can check where the redirect is coming from. If it is the STS and it looks in a certain manner, you can go ahead and allow that request otherwise. But I just made it really simple. In order for me to be able to resolve these tilde signs, I have to go ahead and add a reference. I have to add a reference to Microsoft.identity model. Let's look for Microsoft.identity model. So I'm adding this reference into my project here, ASP.NET project. And this will allow me to add this using Microsoft.identity model.protocols.ws federation. And the request validation source is system.web.util. So it looks like most of my project is compiling except this thing here, because I forgot to inherit from a base class called request validator. That's the missing key. This is how you write a request validator. So I've written the request validator. The obvious next question is, how do I plug this in to the ASP.NET pipeline? Go to web.config here and look for system.web. And here I'm going to say HTTP runtime. I'm going to say request validation type is equal to, and here I'm going to go ahead and type in the type of this request validator. So that's basically it. I'm going to go ahead and run this application. Try and log into the STS, which issues the claims, and looks like I'm able to log in. Let's just verify that I'm actually getting the claims inside of this application here. So I'm going to go into the code behind of this default.aspx, and I'm going to say, let's see, I'm going to say using Microsoft.identity model, and I'm going to say, let's say claims identity is equal to system.threading.thread.current principal.identity as claims identity. If identity is not equal to null, so in other words, if indeed we get a claims identity back, not a Windows identity, for instance, remember, if this was .NET 4.5, it'll always be a claims identity, right? But we're still working in .NET 4, so I'm going to go ahead and for each, and I'm going to say claim in identity.claims, and I'm going to say response.write, let's see, claim.claim type plus claim.claim.value. Let's go ahead and run this, and just to make sure that this is actually working, I'm going to go into the app code directory of localhost 81. I'm going to open this file called custom security token service.cs. Again, this is not a WIF course. I'm not going into the details of how this project works, but in very, very short, this method here is what is responsible for issuing the claims. So just to be cool, I'll go ahead and add a new claim here called email. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm just going to say Sahil Malik at winsmarts.com. So basically what I'm doing here is that I'm issuing a claim here, and this is important because SharePoint wants to have an ID and an email, or it needs to have an ID that is recognized as a unique ID. The simplest way for SharePoint to be able to work with an STS is that if it issues both name and email. The role is not necessary for SharePoint. It's nice to have, but not necessary. But the name and email are nice, are almost required. So I'm going to issue these two claims. I'm going to go ahead and run this. And let's go ahead and log in. And you see that the claims are being issued here. I guess I could format this better, but you can see that the first claim is Adam Carter. The next one is of type role manager. And the third one is email address with the value that we put in there. Simple as that.